This is the news in brief from the United Nations. More than a month since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, key needs continue to be access to food, water and medicines, UN humanitarians say. On Monday, the UN Children's Fund UNICEF said that it's already sent more than 1,000 tonnes of emergency supplies to Ukraine. The agency is also launching an urgently needed cash transfer programme to support 52,000 of the most vulnerable families with children. And amid ongoing concerns over trafficking and abuse of unaccompanied minors, more and more safe spaces for refugee children and women, known as Blue Dots, are being set up in Ukraine's neighbouring countries. UNICEF said that its emergency supplies sent to Ukraine will address the needs of over 8 million people, including 2 million children. These supplies include medicines and medical equipment, winter clothes for children, institutional and family hygiene kits, educational kits and recreational kits. In Ukraine's east, in Luhansk and Donetsk, UNICEF said that 4,000 people sheltering in bunkers have received psychosocial support through online face-to-face consultation and via telephone since Russian troops entered the country on the 24th of February. Many of Libya's migrant detention centres remain places of terrible and systematic abuse that may amount to crimes against humanity, top rights investigators said on Monday. On the sidelines of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, head of the fact-finding mission on Libya, Mohamed Aouja, told journalists that investigators had uncovered further evidence of serious rights violations, which they first made public last October. These abuses against migrants, refugees and asylum seekers are detailed in a report which will be presented to the Council on Wednesday, Mr. Aouja said. His team's findings include new information on 20 detention facilities, official and unofficial, and secret prison networks that are allegedly controlled by armed militias. The development comes amid a backdrop of ongoing violence and lawlessness in Libya linked to the country's protracted crisis that followed the overthrow of President Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Today, tensions remain high after national elections were postponed last December, Mr. Aouja explained, with two competing governments still in place. Against this backdrop, violence and violations and abuses of international human rights law continued, he noted, adding that these violations and abuses and crimes can especially hamper Libya's transition to peace, democracy and the rule of law. It's 21 years since the signing of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, the UN's blueprint to tackle racism and other forms of discrimination, and on Monday, UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet hailed the millions of voices around the globe who've made it their mission to eradicate the scourge. Speaking at the Human Rights Council, Ms. Bachelet noted how progress was being made in confronting racism, particularly after the murder in Minneapolis of George Floyd by police officer Derek Chauvin 2 years ago. Nonetheless, millions of people continue to be confronted by racism, racial discrimination, inequality and exclusion, which affects all areas of the victims' lives, Ms. Bachelet said. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights insisted that in times of peace and especially in times of conflict, authorities, politicians and the private sector had a special responsibility to refrain from, confront and prevent incitement to hatred, discrimination and violence of any sort, including in the online sphere. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. Millions of Ukrainians may soon face serious food insecurity because of the ongoing conflict, the UN warned on Tuesday, amid reports that people are facing life and death decisions on whether to leave Mariupol and elsewhere more than a month since the Russian invasion. The alert from the Food and Agriculture Organization FAO follows assessments in 19 of Ukraine's 24 oblasts or regions, which indicated that it was uncertain that Ukraine could harvest crops, plant new ones, or sustain livestock production. An immediate and worrying finding is that food shortages are expected immediately or in the next 3 months in over 40% of surveyed areas, said Rain Paulson, FAO Director of the Offices of Emergencies and Resilience.
When it comes to the all-important production of vegetables, conflict is likely to severely disrupt production for tens of thousands of smallholder farmers, those who have decided to stay behind.
To help support the wider relief effort, FAO has appealed for $50 million, but it is only 10% funded. Nonetheless, it's been possible to support more than 14,600 farming families by providing them with more than 740 tonnes of urgently needed seed for planting. In a related development, the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, said on Tuesday that high-level discussions are underway in Ukraine to help avert the risk of a radioactive accident at one of the country's nuclear power plants. There have been several close calls, said IAEA Director General Maria Grossi, who's leading meetings with senior Ukrainian government officials to facilitate prompt safety and security support. The military conflict is putting Ukraine's nuclear power plants and other facilities with radioactive material in unprecedented danger, Mr. Grossi warned. He added that urgent action was needed to make sure that the plants can continue to operate safely and securely and reduce the risk of a nuclear accident that could have a severe health and environmental impact both in Ukraine and beyond. An alert now from UN humanitarians who warned on Tuesday that flooding and displacement in South Sudan is expected to worsen when the wet season begins in around a month. In a call for urgent action to protect already vulnerable populations from its worst impacts, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, said that communities are using mud, sticks and plastic sheeting to build barriers around their villages to stop the water from flooding in. Here's Andrew Harper, Special Advisor on Climate Action to the UNHCR.
You've got elderly women, you've got vulnerable populations who are basically grabbing mud and trying to build up the berms around their villages. And this is during summer. This is during the dry season. The wet season hasn't even started yet. So we have to expect that many of these valiant defences will be overcome by the upcoming rain season.
South Sudan is still struggling to overcome the deadly aftermath of civil war that followed independence in 2011. It also had its worst flooding on record in 2021, which impacted more than 835,000 people. And amid more frequent and intense floods and droughts globally, UN humanitarians are worried that the displacement that results from natural disasters will worsen communal tensions. Today, 33 of Sudan's 79 counties are badly affected by flooding, which has not significantly subsided since the last wet season. The impact has been worst in Jonglei, Unity and Upper Nile states, where thousands have been displaced. Daniel Johnson, UN News.